Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Today we are going to take a look at Mercury's upcoming Kazimi. That is Mercury's conjunction with the Sun in the sign of Gemini. Mercury has been combust, going through the transformation of combustion, Kazimi, and then resetting as the evening star. But Mercury's also been protected from some of the damage that often happens when a planet gets really close to the Sun. And this is because Mercury has been in its own sign, which is called being in a planet's own chariot. So we're going to look at some of these details today. We're going to talk about a fun way to track the Mercury Cazimi moments. They occur in two different ways, one through direct motion, one through retrograde motions. We're going to talk about some of the connections you can actually make between those periods. And I'll give you some homework to do with respect to going back in time and looking at the most recent Kazimi compared to this one, because there's some interesting tracking you can do, and I think some really interesting results you'll see if you choose to do it. So I've hopefully got enough stuff today to make this Mercury Kazimi interesting this week, and to hopefully allow us to see or notice some of its significations. So that's our goal for today. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you take 2 seconds to press the like button, it really helps the channel to grow. Appreciate that. Transcripts of any of these daily talks can be found on my website, which is nightlightastrology.com. When you are over there, 2 things to point you to this week. Thursday night, the 12th house, the world we struggle to see. I'm giving a special webinar once monthly, and you can look back at some of the other webinars I've done. I did the outer planets in love, looked at Neptune and Aries, which is a major transit happening next year. This month, we're looking at the 12th house, and we're trying to understand the healing potential of the 12th house in our natal chart. This is great for practitioners or students. People at all levels can attend this. When you register, you'll receive the webinar link, but if you can't attend, we also send you the recording afterward. So check that out. Next month, I'm looking at Uranus and Gemini. The first year course begins this week as well. Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic begins June 16th. It's the first year course in Hellenistic astrology. You can check that out under the courses tab. And there is need-based tuition if you need a little bit of help to make it happen. You can look at that page, and if you have any questions, you can also email us, info@nightlightastrology.com. Also, the Horary class begins. That Horary course begins June 22nd. If you stick around after today's content, you can learn more about Horary astrology, see me do a Horary reading. This is something that requires a little bit of a background in traditional astrology. I often tell people they should be maybe halfway through my first year course before enrolling in this one. But if you have a background in traditional astrology, you are more than welcome to dive into the Horary program that begins on June 22nd. And again, if you stick around after today's content, there's an informational video I've tagged on. It's about 10 minutes that tells you all about Horary and the program, and shows you an actual Horary reading from my practice. So I hope to see you guys at the 12th house webinar tomorrow night. And in the meantime, we will now turn our attention to this upcoming Mercury Cazimi. Kazimi, at the heart of the sun. This is a moment of reset, a moment of regeneration, and identity change, really, for Mercury. This happens throughout Mercury's cycle at 2 distinct points, one through direct motion and one through retrograde motion. I'm going to say more about that in a second, but here you can see this is Friday morning, June 14th, this coming Friday. This is about 11:30 a.m. Central Time that we see the Kazimi taking place. But if we back this up to Wednesday, which is today, we're going to see that Mercury's within about 3 degrees. Now, typically this would mean that Mercury is combust and sort of dying. And often that's pretty difficult for the significations of a planet. When the closer it gets to the sun, the more that the significations become invisible or rendered somewhat impotent or ineffective, or even you may see the significations of the planet and the topics that it represents going through a kind of like a bit of like decay or decomposition or falling apart or difficulty or strain. And then from the moment of the conjunction forward, you will start to see the planets recovering. And if you track that, it's actually a really cool process that will usually map out with respect to changes in your life. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how you can track that today, because I think you'll find it interesting. So if we speed this up, tomorrow, Thursday, June 13th, they're getting pretty close together. And then by Friday morning, they are exactly together. And then if we give it just a few degrees of separation, Mercury will then jump into Cancer, where Mercury will conjoin Venus early part of next week. So we'll be looking at that shortly to round off our week's episodes. We'll be looking at that Mercury Venus conjunction to get you ready for next week. So what I want to do today is talk about, first of all, the the meaningful tracking that you can do. Actually, I need to put the real-time clock back up. All right. We're going to keep this short and sweet today because I want to give you something to do that will hopefully act like a little bit of like astrological homework here. But here's the Kazimi moment. Now, you could track this out between the whole sign houses in your birth chart if you wanted to, but really just what I would do is recommend thinking a little bit more broadly about the significations of Mercury. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. So here is the retrograde, and this was April 11th. Okay, so April 11th, we see Mercury at the heart of the sun. Mercury at the heart of the sun through its retrograde motion. This conjunction is, people argue and have throughout the history of astrology as to where the starting point of a Mercury cycle is. Is it at the inferior superior conjunction? Is it taking place when Mercury is crossing the face of the sun retrograde or direct? That's a simplified version of that. And so I don't really think it matters personally. It's sort of like, what's the starting point of a circle? What it does matter is that we track the cycle through various stages. And there are different ways of tracking the cycle, different features of the cycle that you can pay close attention to. One of them is looking at the conjunctions. So if you go back to about April 11th, here's what I find so interesting. So I'm going to tell you my story. Not that it's like, oh, my story is so important, but just to illustrate. So first of all, you want to think about the significations of Mercury. When it comes to Mercury, you might be thinking about organizational matters, things that have to do with business, work, commerce, data, technology, and especially like organizational structures in your life are often quite mercurial. Learning, teaching, writing, thinking, perceiving, communicating, all different significations of Mercury. How have they changed from April 11th up until now? What kinds of changes have taken place? You can think of the connection from one conjunction to another as providing a kind of connective tissue. And you can do them subsequently. You can keep tracking them and watch a story continue to unfold with respect to the significations of Mercury. Yeah, I don't think it takes a lot to notice some connections that are really meaningful. So for example, when I go back in time to that early part of April, what I find really interesting is that here we are in the midst of a Mercury retrograde. Mercury conjoins the sun. And it was at that time that we had some staff turnover at Nightlight. We had some staff leave, and then it became clear we needed to bring some new staff in. And so at that time, me and some of my other staff started formulating exactly what roles and positions we needed to fill, how to advertise them, etc. So that's like a very mercurial kind of organizational practice, reflecting a kind of retrograde of Mercury, a shift in like the organization of work and business and stuff like that. It's funny where that all lands in the Nightlight company chart too, which I have a chart for Nightlight itself as an LLC, which is it is very interesting how it landed in that chart. But anyway, so as Mercury is now coming through the Kazimi again in Gemini, we find that we have just onboarded all of our new staff. We've brought in several new co-hosts for my monthly overviews and horoscopes and stuff like that, people who are going to work along with me and Alex. And one of the reasons for doing that, by the way, is, and you guys have heard me say this before, but I wouldn't be here if it weren't for people who already had platforms established that gave me a voice and a space to share my early work as an astrologer. So I think it's really important, if you've been in receipt of that kind of good fortune, to pass it on. So we're bringing on I'm still going to be doing my content 5 days a week, but I'm also going to be making room for some bonus content and some new faces and people that are represent very talented alumni from our programs who could use a space to get their work out there. So you'll find that there's some new guests and new faces who'll be joining us over the summer. But what's interesting is that whole process of bringing in a couple of new staff behind the scenes, a couple of new people to share in the creative process of the podcast, all of that happened between the two successive conjunctions of Mercury and the Sun. And I'm telling you, all you got to do is one thing that can help, someone mentioned this in the comments section, you can go back at your pictures, look back at your pictures in your phone. That is a great way to get a reminder of what was going on April 11th, right? So April 11th was the conjunction of Mercury and the Sun in Aries. And remember, that came just on the heels of a solar eclipse in Aries. And now we're seeing, just a little bit later, we are now seeing the conjunction of Mercury and the Sun. All right. Okay, sorry about that. My kids are out of school now, and my daughter's in the other room, and she just came flying down the hallway. And I was like, I'm going to pause this before crazy things happen on screen. So anyway, yeah. So it's not that hard to identify. Mercurial signatures often have to do with, again, things with the mind, speech, communication, technology, information, or news that has a transformative impact, like, oh, I received an email or some new information that has come to light. Because so much of Mercury's process happens invisibly as well, it's also about changes that are happening behind the scenes that involve the slow, steady, gradual changing of I just want to say it's like the neural networks of our lives, or like the little pathways that connect everything. They change. So anyway, but pay attention to what was going on from about April 11th, and then reiterated again now as the two planets come together June 14th. There is connection there to be found if you look for it, or you can see that there are similar changes or shifts happening with respect to mercurial topics. So anyway, okay. Sorry for a little choppiness here. Let's talk about 3 things to watch for. These are applicable for really any Mercury conjunction to the Sun, direct or retrograde. One is, remember that when Mercury conjoins the Sun, it is coming into that conjunction through a long period of being invisible. And when it conjoins the Sun, usually it represents a phasal shift for Mercury. Mercury is now going to start emerging as the evening star, for example, but retrograde, it would be the morning star. That conjunction usually means that some kind of process of decay or breakdown and rebuilding or reorganizing or even editing and revising is complete and will now start to emerge. So one way of thinking about the Kazimi is to ask the question, what has been slowly shifting and changing behind the scenes? And again, if it helps to think about it mentally or in terms of organizational structures in your life, what has been shifting, and what is reaching a place of critical transformation with respect to the topics of Mercury. And often it's funny because you will notice that, for example, we've just selected our co-hosts for some of the programming, the monthly overview that I found 2 co-hosts that are going to be helping me with the monthly overviews, create more of a conversation around the monthly breakdown of the astrology. And one person who I think will also be joining Alex and I for horoscopes. Anyhow, that won't take shape for another month until we get to July's overview and horoscopes, right? I mean, at this time, we're at the beginning of June. So that's weeks out. But by that time, Mercury will be emerging into the evening star position. So again, you could think about what's happening right now as a moment of launching something that's been developing behind the scenes that will sort of come forth in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks. So that's always a good way of thinking about a Mercury conjunction with the sun. Something's been forming or shifting behind the scenes. It reaches a critical point of change right now. You may not see it emerge for a little bit longer. Number 2 is, what have you achieved since the last conjunction? Like, what download or transmission of change did you receive around April 11th? And what's how is that moment of change connected to this moment? Sometimes it'll be easy to spot. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit, it's not as easy. But if you take some time with it, and if you make it a practice of looking at the successive conjunctions, you'll find that there's usually connective tissue. And then number 3, which I guess I've been jumping around, what slowly starts to emerge from this moment forward. This can be a great moment of clarifying something, but remember that it may still take a week, several weeks, a month for the clarity that you're in touch with right now to sort of fully come forth and be integrated and expressing itself openly. So it's still, again, remember that it's sort of behind the scenes. All of this can also mean that stuff that you're not seeing or haven't been aware of, you will become aware of. You might be becoming aware of it now, or in the weeks to come, you may notice that from this moment forward, you start to see something that's been shifting or changing behind the scenes. So these are some of the basic significations of a Mercury conjoin the sun. Again, it's pretty much applicable whether it's direct or retrograde. There are some differences with the retrograde that are important too, but the conjunctions connect to each other. That's the important thing. And so now, you have that one to look for. I was stunned when I looked at April 11th and I realized it was basically exactly at the time that we started formulating our plan for bringing in new staff and bringing in new co-hosts for the podcast and trying to develop more ways in which to promote and support the growth of astrologers coming through Nightlight and stuff like that. So I thought this was just like a fantastic connection between the two periods, as we've just solidified all that we started with under the last Mercury Sun conjunction. Okie dokie. Let me know what you guys find. If you find anything really cool and you want to share your story, drop it into the comments section. And if you want, use the hashtag grabbed or email us grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. I am long overdue for a grabbed episode, so I think we'll probably try to do one. This next week. There's a little bit of a lull, so yeah, maybe we'll throw it in next week. But anyway, soon. And stick around after I sign off. You can learn more about the Horary program. Don't forget the 12th house webinar I'm doing is tomorrow night. I hope to see you guys there, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Bye. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around. I'm going to tell you guys more about the upcoming Horary astrology program, which begins later in June. And I hope that if you have never learned anything about Horary, that you will, at least in listening to this, be exposed to Horary astrology, have a little bit of an understanding of what it is. And if not now, then maybe sometime in the future, you can take time to study it. It is one of the forms of astrology that dates back to the earliest eras of astrology, the Hellenistic era, the medieval era, the early Indian period of astrology. And it is a branch of astrology that is concerned with specific predictive questions. So, for example, a horary question is usually formed in terms of a yes or no answer, and it is cast from the location of the astrologer at the time that the astrologer receives the question. So a typical horary question might be, will I get the job? Or will we get married? Or my cat went missing, will she come back? There are applications of horary astrology that involve the location of missing items, like where is my missing pen? Or where is, I actually helped a farmer one time locate a missing bull that had gotten out of the pasture. So it's a really, really fascinating form of astrology. It's very old, and it is like the birth chart of a question, a predictive question. So again, if I receive a question from someone and it's like, will I get the job? Then I cast that chart at the time I get the question. I usually use the receipt of the email time. And then I cast a chart for that question. And there are a series of traditional techniques that have been around for a very long time, thousands of years, that are used to determine the answer to that question. So with that in mind, let me show you a chart and you can learn, see what it's like in real time. So this chart is, the question that was asked is, will my spouse keep his job? This is a woman who had some very good reason to worry that her spouse might be getting laid off. And so she wanted to know, so she could prepare herself, is he in fact going to be laid off from his job? And so when I receive that question, that's a horary question. When I receive it at 9:03 a.m. on April 10th of 2023, a little over a year ago, here in Minnetonka, Minnesota, where I live, I cast a chart that becomes the birth chart of that question. I then use a series of techniques, and that's what you're going to learn in the Horary program, are those techniques that go into answering all different kinds of questions. Questions about jobs, questions about money, questions about health, questions about marriage or relationships, questions about babies, questions about in pregnancy. I mean, you name it. And even missing pets and people and missing items. You see a lot of different approaches in Horary. And so over the course of a year, we study those approaches to different kinds of questions, and we practice and practice with different charts of different questions, learning the techniques so that we can have this predictive tool in our kit as an astrologer. So anyway, here's a question: will spouse keep his job? In Horary, what happens is you are always looking at the planets that represent the people and aspects of the question. The person asking the question is called the querent. The querent is always given the ruler of the ascendant and usually the moon as a co-signifier of the querent. So in this case, Gemini is rising. So we're going to give Mercury to the querent and the moon. Well, we can see the moon is sitting right on the cusp of the 7th house of marriage, which shows us that the querent, the person asking the question, is indeed really concerned about their spouse. The placement of the moon gives that away because it's sitting on the cusp of the 7th, which is going to be the house of the partner. So you see little things like that. They're a little wink that you have you have a radical chart, so to speak. Now, the 7th house ruler is going to be the spouse. That's Jupiter, since Sagittarius sits on the 7th house cusp. In Horary, we use quadrant-based houses because the theory was all developed through quadrant-based house systems, which is interesting. So this is the only place in my practice that I teach from and use a quadrant-based house system, not whole sign. Anyway, it's really fascinating to look at this chart because Jupiter is going to represent the spouse. So we can see Jupiter over here, about to be conjoined by the sun. Then we look at the spouse's job. And the spouse's job is going to be the 10th house from the spouse. The 10th house from the 7th is going to be the ruler of the 4th. That's called derived houses. This is something that appears in Horary quite a bit. So if we take the spouse as house 1 and we count 1 through 10 from house 7, we get to the cusp of house 4 for the 10th from the 7th, or the spouse's job. That is the sun. So here we see that the sun, exalted sun in Aries, is about to conjoin Jupiter. This means that Jupiter is combust. And when Jupiter is combust like that so badly and the sun is about to conjoin it, that is a moment of death for Jupiter. So the job, we know that combustion from a planet like that is often implied in the charts of death, or that's a condition of debility for Jupiter at the hands of the exalted sun. And Jupiter is, of course, sitting on the 12th house cusp, which is the derived 6th from the 7th house of the spouse, a place that was associated with misfortune. So we can see that this is a very clear indication that that Jupiter is being debilitated by, burnt up by the job. And that moment that's coming of the conjunction could be positively looked at as maybe a death and rebirth of your career. But the first thing that's happening is the death. When it is a possibility built into the question that he could be one of the people that's about to be laid off at his company, and you have this kind of symbolism, this is very clearly a yes, your husband is about to be laid off because of that combustion and the upcoming combustion and conjunction from the sun. Now you might say, what about Kazimi? Doesn't the Kazimi mean like a rebirth? Yeah, but not first, right? The first thing that happens is that Jupiter is being burnt up by the sun. When the sun is the job and Jupiter is the spouse, and there is a possibility that this kind of event happens, then yes, that is exactly what happens. We can also see, if we take out the outer planets, which is something we toggle back and forth in our Horary class, we take out the outer planets, and we can also see that the very next thing that is going to happen is the moon, as an indicator of the flow of events, is about to trine the sun and then immediately hit Jupiter, which means that the moon is also translating the light from the sun to Jupiter. And when the sun is acting here as a malefic, burning Jupiter up, this is another sign that the flow of events is going to lead that malefic sun to eliminate Jupiter. The malefic sun only in this context because the sun is Jupiter's combust. So anyway, these are little rules of horary, and there's a ton of them, right? For every different kind of question, there are different ways of assigning planets to the parts of a question, and there are different techniques that we use to answer the question. In that case, the judgment of the chart was it does look as though your husband is going to be laid off, and indeed that was the outcome. Her husband was laid off like within like a week. So the way that I framed it in the answer was very uplifting, because I said, this is when we see this kind of event, a Jupiter Sun Kazimi, which we've had in the sky recently just now too, as I'm making this, that can be a sign of rebirth. So even if there's a death and a loss here of job, the opportunity for this to be a career reset is also implied by the transition of this Jupiter Sun conjunction. And she did write to me later in the summer last year to tell me that he found a new job. So, and it was indeed like a positive reset. So half of the art of horary is delivering the news. How do you deliver a predictive result without increasing someone's anxiety, in a way that's constructive? How do we take what we see and translate it for someone when the question is predictive? And there's often a lot of, people have a lot of emotion invested in the outcome. So this is a beautiful form of astrology. If you are interested in studying it, here is how to register. You go over to the website, which is nightlightastrology.com, and you are going to go to the courses page. And when you're on the courses page, you're going to click on the horary course. You need to have a background in understanding dignities, aspects, and house meanings. And then it starts on June 22nd. At the bottom, you will find that there is need-based tuition assistance. And there are also payment plans that you can utilize, and a one-time payment saves a little bit of money. So, but if you need tuition assistance because it would be impossible for you to take the program otherwise, please be sure to check that out and come study horary. It's an amazing, amazing form of astrology. If I could do nothing but practice horary, I would, because it is so interesting to see the unique picture of each situation come to life in the context of a horary reading. There's no birth chart needed for it either. It's amazing that astrology can work that way. We always think, oh, it has to work off from a birth chart. No. We can use astrology just like we use tarot cards. Cast them out at the moment a unique question comes up. Cast a chart at the moment of a question, and you have a series of techniques and approaches that can help you answer it. So that's horary in a nutshell. I hope to see you guys there, and thanks for listening.